Hello, my fans and friends, and welcome to the creator commentary for UTC Chapter 11, Class Warfare Part 2. This is the chapter that kicked off Phase 3 of UTC. As I've talked about in previous commentaries, I approach the comic from the standpoint of how I would write a television series with individual seasons. That helps me sort of break down plot arcs and thematic arcs. So Phase 1 was chapters 1 through 4, and that followed a continuing story arc of Cass and Flint being transformed. Chapters 5 through 10 were all mostly self-contained stories, but there was a thread of certain themes that I was trying to explore during that. The main theme was, this school for mad scientists. How do you run this? How do you police all these creative but also scary projects that the students are doing, and tackling it ethically, but also these are really revolutionary developments that we're seeing from these student projects. They could really do some good in the world, but they could also do some incredible harm if they're not regulated, or if the students themselves are malevolent, malicious, sadistic, sociopathic, which is a common theme in my villains. So this chapter, and I recommend you watch the commentary for Chapter 10 first, because I'm going to try not to repeat myself from Chapter 10. There's a lot of new developments and new problems and new perspectives that came to me while I was working on Chapter 11 as opposed to Chapter 10. I'm going to also warn you right up front, right now, this is going to get a little more emotional than certain commentaries, than any of my commentaries before. I've thought about how I would approach this commentary, and the bottom line is there are certain inextricable elements to what went into this chapter that have to do with the things that went on in the real world while this chapter was in development. I started working on this chapter at the end of 2015, October 2015. I began drawing this chapter. I didn't finish until summer of 2019. And this commentary, for the record, this being recorded in December 2019, so it's been several months since I finished the whole thing. This is the longest time I've spent on a single comic in my life. The production cycle of this was insane. A lot of you were very patient with me, waiting week to week and sometimes month to month and season to season for me to finish a single page. And there are reasons why it was very difficult for me to complete this comic. A lot of them were psychological, and I'm going to touch on that here because I would like to tell the story. It's a little hard to talk about, and it's going to be a little hard to listen. So I apologize for those who were just coming here out of curiosity to say, oh, how did he make a page? How did he do the comic? There's going to be some real talk. It's going to get political. It's going to get personal. And if that's not what you came here for, that's fine. You can skip to the next commentary. If Chapter 12's commentary is out, please skip to that. But I'm going to talk about some heavy stuff, especially toward the end of this commentary, because this is a very different chapter than I expected to make when I was writing Chapter 10, when I was drawing Chapter 10. When we last left our heroes, they were, some of them were in captivity, some of them were just off on the sidelines, bamboozled as to this new developments happened. Ken Telekin, who is a senior, he got a whole bunch of other students together, and they planned a coup. They injected Jen with some sort of serum that gave her a special type of cancer whose side effect is to regress her to the age of a toddler. And so you see her here. She's a child again, in body, not in mind. She still has her memories and experience. But she's been diminished, and it's all been quite a shock to her. And Ken has said, if you just let me and all the other students that want to let our experiments run wild, we are going to be developing some stuff today. We're taking over the school, and if you don't stop us, then we'll cure Jen, and she won't die of cancer. That's pretty heavy stuff. The school's been taken over, and our principal is about to die horrifically. And there's just a whole lot of really deep stuff going on. And I set a lot of this up initially to solve in Chapter 10. It was all just going to be this really quick uprising and just a couple of big splash pages of action, big, brawl, and then they save the day somehow, and Ken is put in custody, and Jen is not cured. She isn't dying, but she's stuck as a kid. That's the outcome I was always aiming for, but the method by which I originally was planning on reaching it was much simpler, and it didn't really explore some of the deeper themes to the comic. And when I started writing page by page Chapter 11, I realized that the destination that I was trying to get to was fine. It was how I was getting to it. I really spent several months between finishing Chapter 10 and picking up a pencil to draw the first page of Chapter 11. I spent a lot of time wondering, what am I doing this for? What am I trying to say? Is what I'm trying to say worth saying? And these are questions I've asked myself before, but at this point in the development of the comic, and at the point I was in my life, I was transitioning. I didn't have a job. I'd quit my job to go freelance, and that's when I drew Chapter 10, and I was planning on continuing, with freelance, but, it wasn't paying the bills. I wasn't really sure if that's the direction my life should go. I realized that I was terrible at being my own boss. As you've seen, I can't really get the page updated every single week all the time. I've had to go several months and sometimes years without updating the comic, and it's partly because of life things and partly because of just I'm not sure where I need to take the comic. And so it's never really been that easy for me as a creator in my adult life because of all these different things going on internally and externally in my life. And that's nothing new. It's not unique to me either. Every creator has that. But my personal story was my life was sort of meandering around, and I was in the middle of searching for jobs. And I can't continue UTC until I actually have a steady job again. Well, I got a steady job. Toward the end of 2015, I got a steady job, and I'm like, okay, great. Now that that's going well, I'm going to pick the comic back up, and we'll start phase 3. And I began drawing it, and I realized that it was actually hard for me to continue drawing it. And it wasn't because the pages were that complex. It was because I didn't really have faith in the story. I had lost faith in my ambition. And I didn't really know what the comic was supposed to be. And I wasn't sure if it was, honestly, I wasn't sure if it was worth continuing at all. But the last thing I wanted to do was give up the comic without resolving at least this big cliffhanger that I'd left you all with. So I said, whether I'm going to end the comic earlier than expected or not, I'm going to finish this single story. And if Chapter 11 ends up being the final chapter of UTC, then so be it. And so with that in mind, I began working on the comic. So yeah, bit of a dark start. I promise you this has a more uplifting ending, but it's going to get a little more, it's going to get a little, I'm not going to say upsetting, but it's going to get a little more depressing for me as we go into this, somewhat depressing. But yeah, so we're going to go in here, page 1. We pick right up where the last chapter left off. The characters, the first thing I had to do was establish exactly where all these characters are and what they're planning on doing next. So we see Katsuko with All the adults are now unconscious thanks to Ken and this like machine that's caused all the adults in the building to faint. And so Katsuko puts Sin, Jen's husband Sin, who was in the building to shoot his documentary, she puts him in a closet. And then we have the larger group of the ethics class trying to figure out, well, what's going to happen. First thing right off the bat, I wanted to make absolutely sure, don't worry, everybody, no one's dead. No one's dead. They might have a couple bruises from falling down, but they're all asleep. So, production-wise, on a small tangent, since I've got the computer up here, I will show you how the page was originally plotted. This part I'm really proud of. I spent an entire day just on this panel. We've never seen Attic High all together. This is the very front of the building. We've seen shots of this front 3 or 4 times. So I had that, and I knew that the final page of Phase 1, we see the principal's office windows. They're right here. So we see where the principal's office is located, but we don't see the rest of the building, and it isn't until Class Warfare begins, Chapter 10's original panel, the first panel to establish the cafeteria exterior, that's this over here. So I drew this part, not really knowing where it connected to the building. I'm just like, okay, well, there's an annex on Simon Attic Hall, which has the cafeteria. So it's here. But I'd never put 2 and 2 together. I never knew what the rest of the building looked like. And I'm like, if we're going to be spending a lot of time in this building, and I had plans on, the actions moving from here to here to here, and it all ends up in the cafeteria. That was where this was always going to collide, was in the cafeteria or in the hallways near the cafeteria, was where I'd always planned to stage the major action. So I'm like, I want the readers to actually get a sense of this place. That's kind of important. So it took a while, but I sketched out this layout for the building, figuring out how do I fit all of the classrooms and the offices that we've seen so far, and how do I fit this chunk of cafeteria, how do I cram that into the building in a way that matches the architecture we've already seen. And it was very difficult because in certain places I'd sort of contradicted myself as to where the doors in the cafeteria are on the interior panels. And this is a lot of inside baseball, but, well, what are these commentaries for? So I finally put this together. Now we know where the entrance is in comparison to the classroom wings, in comparison to the cafeteria. And so I started drawing all these little details. Oh, maybe there's this little outdoor sort of rec space on the second floor. You can access it from that. There's like a hallway that looks over the cafeteria. That runs through this section in the back here. So the seating area is over here, and it's all open to the ceiling, but then right here is where there's a glass wall. And we've seen this before in Chapter 9. The first scene that we ever see in the cafeteria, we see that glass wall. And I'm like, well, what if there's like a door right out here where the students can just lounge? And you have like a feature wall here with some like art. And then I'm like, this is actually a really solid it's not just a solid like sketch of the school. This is actually a good angle for an establishing shot. I really don't feel like redrawing this entire school again. I spent an entire day trying to do this. So what I did was, I'm like, I'm just going to make this the establishing shot for the comic. So I scanned the sketch, and I put it right into the page, and then I polished it off by adding the layers. I colored the school in, and then I started adding the atmospheric effects. Here's the surrounding area, and this is all the parking lot. I drew these lamps way too tall. These little things are supposed to be the cars here, which are getting covered in snow because there's a blizzard out. So yeah, so that's some fog there. And then I covered everything in snow. So like the initial layer of snow, making sure that it's going up against the doors and close to reaching the windows, because this snowstorm's dumping feet of snow in one like 6 to 8 hour period. this is my excuse for blocking off the school. Like, Ken can't shut the school down without at least some of the students, at the very least, calling 911 on their cell phones. There's no way he can... Well, I guess in retrospect, I could have created an invention that they had that blocked all wireless transmissions, but I didn't do that. So there would have been landline phones anyway. So how do I keep emergency services delayed from getting to the school? Well, major snowstorm. That's the whole point of the storm existing. So I had to make sure that you saw, yeah, okay, things are getting really bad. It's not easy to get to the school. So these are all of the layers and layers of snow and blizzard and stuff that I created for this page. And I think this is tweaked even more for the final. You're going to see also, if you didn't already notice, these panels here don't match the panels in the final page. So I made this page in October 2015, and then after I made this page, I started working on this next page, but this is a situation where I'm often laying, if you're looking at it like a train, look at this like a steam train, I'm laying the tracks right before the train's about to run over them. That's pretty much how I developed Chapter 10, and it's also how I developed Chapter 11, because I just couldn't figure out from scene to scene where the students were supposed to go. I had the destination in mind, but the path I was taking was meandering through this metaphorical forest that was so dense and dark, and I'm just like, maybe this is the best path. No, it's not going to work. Let's move them over this way now. Let's try going in this direction. I lost the confidence in I really have to focus more on this. I need more time. So I debuted this page in October 2015 with the promise that I was going to update this weekly, and then immediately after I put it out, I realized I just hit another roadblock, and I was like, I can't do it. I can't do it. I have to be real. Not going to continue updating the page. So instead, it was about 4 or 5 months. It was early 2016 that I really resumed working on the comic and slowly starting to release the pages. And I'm like, I'm just going to work on it. And once I get a page done, I'll put it online. No schedule. I can't force this out of me right now. I'm not in a place where I can force this out of myself. So I really didn't try. I worked on the pages as I felt up to it. And I went back when I was ready to resume. I'm like, you know what? Some of these aren't great. I don't really like this angle here. That doesn't really... I wanted to show more about, the students that were on their way to help Ken. I wanted to show more of them. So I'm like, this isn't really dynamic enough, and it doesn't really show what I wanted. So I redrew these panels entirely into these shots. You see more of these students that are like, let's bundle up our projects and go to where Ken is. So you see that happening. And, yeah, so that's sort of where that was. So now this page was drawn several months after the previous page. This is around February or March 2016. And from this point on, I was working on maybe one page a month or one page every 2 months for a couple of years. And it's really just I think I know where I'm going with this, but I need to take it, as it comes. So this is another example of a page that was a bit modified. There were many pages here that I modified. I'm not going to bore you with all the minute details, but there's a lot of this where I was trying to tell the story the best way I thought I could, and then a few months go by, or maybe even a year or two, and then I would look back at pages like this and go, you know what, it's missing a panel. Because here, it's sort of kind of hard to tell in just one page how Katsuko goes from, okay, if I just pick up my teddy bears from my storage locker, I'll be able to help out Cass and everybody. Because she knows Cass and Morty and Jen are tied up in a janitor closet. So she needs to free them first. That's her priority one. So she's going to get her bears to do that. But then, oh, whoops, a whole bunch of these students are motivated by Ken to, get their experiments. So she runs into them. How does she dispatch them? This is my big moment where I get to debut Cass's teddy bears. I've wanted to show off Katsuko's teddy bears. I've wanted to show these off for a long time. They were originally planned for the end of Phase 1. There was a storyline I was working on, which I've told you about before. It was the original story where Jen is regressed was actually supposed to be the chapter before the final chapter. The final chapter of Phase 1, as it was originally intended, was called Cotton Stuffed Nightmare. And it was all about Katsuko and her teddy bears, and they malfunction and they run amok and take over the school. That never developed, but I still liked the idea of her having this army of teddy bears. So I'm like, well, now's a great chance for me to show what Katsuko's got to bring, because she really hasn't had. She's been a tertiary character until this point. We really haven't seen her do a whole lot of stuff. Let's see her do some stuff. So this is my way of showing it. But she runs in here and she's like, oops, I gotta improvise. How do I keep these guys from attacking me? So she really quickly puts on a face of, oh, you thought I was really working with them? I hated them as much as you did. It keeps them, they're suspicious, obviously, but the idea is that it keeps them off their guard for just a few seconds, long enough for her to open her locker up and then tell all of her bears to attack. I didn't have this panel with their confused reactions. It went straight to from this to this, so you don't really see that moment of hesitation, of befuddlement. Is she really telling the truth? Is she really on our side? So I pushed these panels a bit lower, and I put this in here, and I was like, oh, this works a lot better. This tells the story better. We now get to see why, it infers why she was allowed to get to her locker. They were just sort of caught off guard. So, yeah, and so we get that attack. Oh, excuse me, my microphone is drifting. All right, hopefully that didn't make too much noise. My mic stand sort of drooped. I hope that doesn't happen again during this. Anyway, so yeah, so now we have just another thing I needed to establish was the general chaos that was happening in the school. And this is a big moment for Karis. She puts her big mouth to use, and she wrangles all the students together. This is a scene that I didn't really have big plans for Karis. I discussed that during New Tricks, which was written by my friend Jeff Walter. I didn't really have big plans for Karis at all after the Poodle Monster incident. And ever since Jeff wrote New Tricks, I'm like, wow, Karis has actually got some real potential as a character. And considering it's her mom whose life is in danger and the school that her family founded is in danger, Karis is really motivated. And ever since New Tricks, she's in the background been developing her character and, figuring out what she wants to stand for and what she'll stand up for. And one of those things is her mom. And so this was like, I realized, hey, you know what? It would be absolutely criminal if I didn't put Karis in a leading role for at least these side scenes with the larger class population. She sort of steps into her mother's shoes as an authoritative figure. And she speaks for her mom. And this was if New Tricks hadn't existed as a chapter, we wouldn't be seeing this hero moment from Karis right now. So it's like I was really happy with the inspiration and that Jeff brought to the character. And we're gonna keep seeing stuff like that as the comic continues. This is just one really prime example of how, yeah, you know what? This character deserves more, and she has the potential to do more. So yeah, now we're back in the janitor closet with Cass, Morty, and Jen, and then the bear. I really wanted to play up, like, it's basically a horror, because the original Cotton Stuffed Nightmare was the story I was originally going to be like these cute little cuddly teddy bears, but they can actually possibly destroy you. And I wanted to combine the cute and cuddly with this ominous, creepy menace that you were like, what is this thing gonna do to me? So this is the page where I really put that on display. So I have this the maw opens up and it just swallows his entire body. And Cass is like, what just happened? So yeah, happens again. So this is a really easy and fun way to dispatch these two villains. And now the rest of the next like 4 or 5 pages were difficult to like stage. In the commentary, this is a bit of a side note, but I promise you it's going somewhere. In the commentary to the Robert Rodriguez movie Planet Terror, which is a parody of like B movies that came out a few didn't come out a few years ago. It's like 2008 or something. But in the creator commentary, Robert Rodriguez is talking about how B films are staged. Disaster films in particular are plotted out, where Act 1 establishes all of your different characters in different locations, and none of them know each other, but they all experience this major disaster. And one by one they come together during Act 2, and slowly they start to form up and learn who each other are and figure out that they can all work together to survive this disaster or fix what's gone wrong. And then in Act 3 of the movie is where they all do that together. And Robert Rodriguez is like, Act 1 is great because you get to establish all these quirky characters. Act 3 is great because it's where you get your final action and all hell breaks loose and you get a fun ending. But Act 2 is horrible. It's really tedious because Act 2 is just about putting the pieces of the puzzle together. You gotta find where all the characters are. You gotta make them find each other. You have to reintroduce all of the characters to each other before you can move on with the plot. And it slows the movie down. So what he did with his movie was he cut out the tedious part of Act 2. His movie has an abbreviated Act 2 because the film gets to a certain point and then cuts and there's a missing reel, as if this old film just like one of the reels just got lost, and so now that we're seeing it in the quote-unquote modern day, as if this film is 40 years old, now that we're seeing it, we're missing a piece of the movie, but it's the least important piece of the movie that's missing. And then the missing reel cuts back to the actual film, and everything's on fire, and the zombies are invading the safe house where all the heroes are gathering, and everybody knows each other all of a sudden, where we haven't actually gotten to see that. It's all implied. All that tedious stuff is dispatched. And I was thinking of that a lot when I was writing this, because I'm like, Noah's group's over here, Cass's group is over here, and Ken's group is doing who knows what in the cafeteria, and then you have the larger student body that Karis is organizing. How do I get all these people together? How do I do that? And it was very much just like, what's the simplest, most efficient way to do that? And so I just have them run into each other. So we've got Noah's group following sounds of the commotion, and off-panel, Karis explains how between like 2 pages ago and now, Walker, the hall monitor, he knew where Jen was going. I fortunately had that. If I hadn't had that before, if I hadn't been looking back and been like, oh, you know what? There was one student who knew. There's one student besides Katsuko who is free who knew exactly where Jen was going. So that's the only way any of these characters even know where to head at this point. So Walker being in the script from the previous chapter saved my butt in this chapter for this. Okay, there's actually a way for all the heroes to know, hey, we need to go to the advanced labs because that's where they were last seen. That's where the principal was last seen. So they're on their way to do that. And meanwhile, I finally established what the heck the villains are up to. I'm very bad at this. For going back years and years, I never really focused on villains and their evil plans. So when the villain just shows up in a story, they already have done all the legwork. They've already put the machine together, or they've already set their plan in motion. And now all that's left is for the villain to explain what he's doing to the heroes, and then the heroes stop him. It's not the best way to tell the story. You don't want to, the villain monologue. I mean, it's in every James Bond movie. It's been parodied so much. So I'm like, how do I avoid that here? And Ken especially is too smart to know not to do that. He knows not to do that, is what I'm saying. So I have him explain it to Kestrel and therefore the audience. So Kestrel and Ken really have been planning this whole thing, and it's implied here, but it's not revealed until later in this chapter. But the implication here is Ken is trying to assemble all of the students' machines in order to create the cure for cancer that he's been researching that has eluded him. In researching the cure for cancer, he's found the cure for aging, but he hasn't actually cured cancer, and there's a real personal reason why he's doing that. His dad has cancer, and Ken has a malignant tumor, which we're going to find out. So this is one of those situations where the villain is doing the wrong thing for the right reasons. And it also plants the seed of Kestrel really starting to have this doubt, like, well, okay, look, I know you plan to threaten the principal, and you plan to get her out of the way so that we could do all of this. But yes, certain things went wrong. The good guys found out before they were supposed to, so now we're trying to improvise, and we're creating chaos in order to do this thing. While they're all running around out there, we're doing our thing in here, and they can't get organized fast enough to stop us. We just have to hope that we're fast enough to put the cure together before anyone can stop us. That's sort of this plan. So it all, like, it was like just this whole, I was improvising too. I'm like, look, I know why Ken's doing this, and I know what his plan is, but his plan's really bad. Like, what if someone finds out? What if this happens? Or what if the machines don't go together the way you want? Like, this is not a great plan Ken put together, and he's supposed to be a smart guy. So I was actually fighting with myself as a writer, like, I don't think I've written the best setup here. So I sort of tried to retcon some of the reasoning for why this is going down the way it is. And part of my retcon was, no, Ken actually had a slightly better plan, but this is his plan B, and he's doing the best he can. So I'm not going to pretend that this fixes all the fridge logic that you might be thinking about. Well, why didn't Ken do this, or why didn't Kestrel think of this? It's because I didn't think of it. So yeah, everyone's just making do with the situation that has developed. So yeah, so we're proceeding onward with the heroes. Finally, everyone's together now. They've found the closet just outside of the advanced labs where Katsuko has now rescued everyone. This is, like, I stopped shading the comic in Phase 2 because it was just taking up... I didn't think it was adding too much to the page, whereas it was taking me hours per page to do the shading. But this panel right here, I thought it was very important to get this light in the room, the light in the room from the door, and it's mother and daughter seeing each other for the first time with their ages inverted. Now Karis is the much older one, and it's quite a shock to both their systems to really realize that. And then we have our hero shot. So, yep, this is another... I redrew this panel. If you're a longtime reader and you first saw this panel, I think this came out around end of 2016 or beginning of 2017. Cass's face, and Demetrius and Cass, maybe others, their faces, they didn't look that great. And I'm not sure if they still do. Demetrius's, I think, is better. But the old versions of these, I hated. And I don't even think I have the old versions to show you. I think I just overwrote all the files because I knew there was no going back to the bad panels. This was also, I think this is still, anyway, it's just me being a perfectionist. I realized I can't just redraw every single page. If I do, this comic will never be over. But I had to fix these. I think they work a bit better now. But if you're wondering, these looked a little different, I thought. They did indeed look different. So this is now the culmination of everything Jen was trying to build with the ethics class. We didn't see them in action too often in Phase 2, but the ethics class, the purpose of them was to help the principal and the other faculty members understand where the students were really coming from with their ideas, And if the ideas were a bit unethical, if they were possibly had the potential to harm people, or if the students were deliberately harming any of the organisms they were growing or any actual people, the whole point of this ethics review was for the students to tell the faculty. They were basically narcs. I'm not sure if I used the word narcs in here or not. I think I have a student calling them narcs at one point. But that's basically one of their functions, is to rat out students that are doing harm or have potential to harm or intent to harm themselves or their fellow students or whatever creatures they're creating. So these are supposed to be the students that are learning the most about what is ethical, what is right, what is just. And they are the best equipped to be heroes, essentially. And this is their final test. And again, more character growth from Karis. This is another thing I threw in at the last minute when I realized, you know what? I need to throw a few panels in here of Karis realizing I'm actually no good to you guys right now. The best thing I can do is to keep my mom out of danger. And it's also a way for us to see, look, Cass and the crew, they were pretty mean to Karis. They've been pretty mean to her this whole series, especially when you see her come back in New Tricks. Now we see Cass is like, look, we need all hands on deck, and yeah, I realize, she doesn't apologize to the way she treated Karis here. She should apologize, but she doesn't apologize here. But she just says, we could use your help too, and she means it. But of course, it does have the appearance of coming across as a bit patronizing. And Karis will see it that way because she realizes that for the longest time she was the butt of everyone's jokes. So it was important to just acknowledge that and have the characters say it right out. So we've got this sequence. I wanted to show the transformation ray. We haven't seen this transformation ray in a long time. This is the ray that Noah designed, and Morty stole Noah's notes and developed the ray himself. And this is the ray that turned Karis into a poodle monster, and it's been confiscated. And that was a minor plot point that was recurrent through Phase 2. And it's the crux of Ken's plan. And so I wanted to show everybody, here's what he's doing. He's connecting the ray gun to all these other inventions. You see the machine that shrank everybody in Big Big World, and he's plugged it into all these other inventions that we haven't seen also. So this idea of all the students' machines being brought together as one whole to do this bigger thing that none of them could have done individually. And we just here it's just an excuse for me to show off the transformation ray, but it's a slow build to be like, look, they're building towards a bigger thing. So all the students are getting to turn into the things that they love the most, the things that they want to turn into the most. So what's happening here is we have Chuck is turning into basically his fursona. This is, a lot of UTC is my love letter to fans of transformation-themed stories. If you love werewolves, if you love, any cartoons where a character turns into an animal or turns into just anything, shrinks, grows. UTC's always been my way of scratching that itch and just being like, I want to find fun ways to talk about this idea, or to just, have this fun adventure with this transformation and exploring the potential of every transformation. And that has gotten me to it's gotten me to interact with the furry community, which for a while I didn't really identify as a furry. Now I do, and it's largely because I've made so many friends in the community, and I've realized, yeah, you know what, I share all these interests too. I love drawing animal people, always have. So it's like, I want to work in that into the comic. So what better way for that to be integrated than to actually have a furry turn into his fursona, which is an online persona that some furries use. That's their sort of ideal avatar that they use to represent themselves online. And there's a lot of costumes. People make the costumes in real life, fursuits, and a lot of them nowadays they actually use like a lot of cool high tech stuff. They actually make the eyes glow. They put LEDs and stuff in, and and a lot of people design their characters to have glowing parts. And so I'm like, let's do that. Let's find a way in real life. And so I talk about using phosphorescence, which is the word that he's trying to say here, but his muzzle is a bit new. He needs some more experience talking out of it to make words work. So I'm like, all of his insides glow. So everything that, you know, has the inside of his ears glow, the inside of his mouth glows, his eyes glow, everything. And I'm like, this is just, that's fun. It's a cool aesthetic. And how would somebody do it if they wanted to translate it into the real world? So here it is. It's a bit of a running joke, but it's really, it's not, I'm not making fun of people that have sonas that do that or that have suits that do that. It's just, it's a fun thing. And so I really hope that you see it, people see that it's like a loving homage, nudge to people that have characters like that. 'Cause it's cool. It really is. So this establishes, Katsuko's bears, they're multi-purpose. She designed different bears to do different things. This one doesn't trap you in a giant bear cocoon. It's a surveillance bear. So the idea of all of her bears have the idea of protecting children. That's what she's designed all these bears to do. It hasn't been stated outright in the comic, but that's pretty much their implicit function. The bears that cocoon you, that's actually meant to protect you. The idea is if a child is about to come to harm in some way, the bear detects that and acts as this full-body airbag and protects the child with a fully functioning life support system. This bear is a baby monitor. So this is, you know, this keeps track of your baby and or your young child and records everything. And so Katsuko is using it to spy on everybody inside the cafeteria, and she's using her watch to watch it. And then now this is where so I set everybody up. Now finally everybody's in the right place. Everybody knows everything they need to know. And now the big fight goes down. And I had high ambitions for the fight. And the longer it took to get to the fight, and the more pages I was spending drawing out the build up to the fight, getting everybody in place, having all the information presented that you need to know going into this, I realized, look, this fight has to be big. The payoff needs to be important. And I really sort of psyched myself out for it. And it was the most intimidating pages I've ever drawn for UTC. I really, really wanted to deliver something that was worth the years of waiting. If you were following this comic month by month, year by year, we're into the 2017 pages now, and it's been at this point it's been 2.5 to 3 years since Class Warfare started with Chapter 10. So it's like, look, we gotta get to this. This is where it's all been building up. And I started getting very nervous, and I started doubting myself a lot. I'm not really great with drawing lots of crowd shots. You haven't seen me draw many panels with people, with lots and lots of people. And when I do, they're all grayed out and not all colored in because I can't spend the time to color every single individual person, or they're just like silhouettes in the back like this. This is a cheat I've used since all the way back in Chapter 1 to draw crowd scenes. They're just blobs of color in the background. It's just these pages, all these characters, and yeah, a lot of them are like recurrent character designs. A lot of these characters, like we've seen him before. We've seen, some of these characters we've seen before, and I try to reuse them to give the idea of, these are all students in the same school, so you're going to see the same students over and over. But it's also helpful for me, so I don't have to don't have to design brand new people every single time there's a crowd shot. But it wore me down. This comic really, really as we got into the middle of things, it wore me down. So we finally have the fight start. There's the narcs. I knew I had narcs in here somewhere. We have the fight start, and we have this big thing where I always envisioned something was going to collapse. Like maybe somebody was going to grow into a giant and like break the school apart, and there'd be collateral damage. There was always this idea that someone was going to get severely injured, and it was going to be the school itself was going to be destroyed, because I was always planning on ending this with the school can't continue the way it is. Something's got to change about the school. And eventually I settled on the school needs to shut down. That's where we're going with this. This can't be allowed to continue. Either the authorities are going to shut it down, or the students are going to destroy it, tear it down literally, or Jen's going to decide enough is enough, we're closing the school. So I wanted the school itself to be torn down, at least in some way. And I went back and forth on how big it was eventually going to be, and when I finally decided how the action was going to unfold, I realized it would be pretty unrealistic to have the building collapse. So I just had this part of the cafeteria, the overlook section of the cafeteria, collapse. I'm fast forwarding just to show you this part. So I basically like, look, they're gonna just tear this down. It's enough to get Demetrius injured, and it's enough to really just lend some physicality to the danger and the damage being done to the school body. So I tried, as the story went on, I tried more and more to connect thematically everything. So as the school students are being torn apart, the physical school is being torn apart too. So this is where I really, like, before I came to all these real conclusions, like, I had these threads going on, but I had like 5 or 6 different threads at the same time. How does the machine get put together? What does it really do? How does Cass build her army to fight back? How do they fight back? What do they eventually do with Ken? What eventually happens to the school? And how does this all tie together? And how can I tell this story well? And the more I thought about all these students fighting each other, and the more I realized Demetrius is getting his arm broken. They believe Jen is dying of cancer. She really isn't. Ken's not telling them the whole story, but he's using the threat of Jen dying to try and get Cass and everybody to be complacent. Of course, it doesn't work. Cass is like, damn you, we're going to do this, and you're going to fix the principal anyway. So we have the threat of death. We have physical threats. We have a school population fighting each other. And the more I was looking at this, and the more I was deep into this muck, these dire situations, I realized that this had a lot of disturbing parallels to the real world. There were, over the course of this comic was made during like 3 or 4 years where the U.S. was in the middle of several school shootings. And there were many school shootings, unfortunately, before I started working on this comic. But it was while I was working on this that I was so closely tied mentally to this idea of violence in school. And this really like intense violence. And no one's shooting each other, but you don't really need a gun that shoots bullets to have violence in school that can cause some real psychological damage. And that's when I started becoming really doubtful that I was doing something good here. Like, is pitting half of the school against the other half of the school, like, is that a good thing? Am I doing a good thing? Are people reading this comic and being disturbed by it? Are people, are some people reading this comic who've actually been impacted by violence? Whether it's in school or domestically or somewhere else? Like, am I treating the subject with the sensitivity that it needs to be treated with? And for a while, my answer was, no, I'm not. This is something that I need to put more weight into. And the comic heretofore, I wasn't sure if it had put the proper weight into it. And so in the real world, I had to put the comic down for a while. So between these two pages, you may be able to physically connect these two pages into a spread, but it took maybe 4 or 5 months between when I drew this page and when I drew this page. Excuse me. Sorry, runny nose. It took me a while to really find my footing again. I was overwhelmed with a lot of these thoughts about, I'm depicting school violence, and that's not good. I don't want UTC to... UTC was supposed to be this fun romp with transformation adventures, a Saturday morning cartoon. That's the vibe that I was going for. And this doesn't feel like a Saturday morning cartoon. This looks like a violent film in the disguise of a Saturday morning cartoon. And I thought, that's a dissonance that I'm not comfortable with. And I was really starting to think, this is really bad. I might be a bad person for drawing this, for writing this. What do my readers really think about this story? How am I coming across as someone who just sort of is like, yeah, we're having some fun in school. People are getting maimed. It's okay, though. Like, that's not okay. And it was just, I was in a darker place for a little while. And I started thinking, this is supposed to be an optimistic comic. How do I get out of this muck that I've dug myself into? How do I come up with a satisfying resolution that is upbeat, that promises you're in the deepest, darkest part of the tunnel, but I promise you there is a light at the end of this tunnel, and you're going to make it out of it. That's the message that's where I were like, that's how I get out of this. I need to put that into the comic. We're at our lowest point right here, where Demetrius falls to the ground, breaks his arm, where Ash is so angered by seeing his boyfriend hurt like this that he just crashes right through a window without even thinking and drops Kestrel, the person who caused D that pain, and without even thinking about, oh, well, we're gonna hit the ground at some point. No, he crashes right through the window without thinking anything else, and he just is like, that was a powerful moment. I really, really liked that idea, but it's like, this is also pretty intense. This is an intense scene, and it took me a while, but I figured out, at least, and you're the judge of whether it works or not, but I figured out a way to blend these dire circumstances with some amounts of levity. If not straight up comedy, at least something a bit more lighthearted. So Ash punching Chuck on his way down and using him as a cushion to land on. Yeah, they're hurt a little bit, but not as badly as Demetrius is. But it's still like, that was an intense moment. So yeah, it's just, once I started drawing these pages were still hard to draw. This literally took me 2 weeks to sketch this, to ink it, and to color it. This took me 2 straight weeks of just sitting down an hour a day, 2 hours a day, whenever I could find the time, to get this page done and establish all this stuff, because this is our real, like, I had to show everybody gearing up for the fight. And by the time I drew this page, my mood had picked up, and I'd found that light at the end of the tunnel. I found that way to bring us back up from this this darker place that the comic had gone into. And honestly, as I talk about it, I don't know if that's the way you perceive these pages as you read them. I don't know if you yourself drew a parallel between school shootings and what's going on in this comic. But to me, I was steeped in it deeply. It was on the news all the time. And it wasn't just violence in schools. There were a lot of dark, heavy things going on in the U.S. in 2016, 2017, and you know what they are. I will not talk about that too much right now. Most of it, doesn't quite, matter to this particular story, but the weight of all of it was sinking deeper and deeper into my heart. And I felt this hopelessness. Not for me personally, but for my country, for the world. And I was too deep into it myself. I was too distraught by it to really see things more clearly. And it took me a while to find my sources of optimism, the things that have made me the most optimistic in my life. I've always had this: better people will prevail, good will prevail, smart, intelligent, compassionate people will prevail over any evil. It was the hardest I've ever had to convince myself of that in my lifetime. The things that have been going on in the real world. And I'm really fortunate that I've never personally experienced anything like this. I'm extremely fortunate that it's all just been news articles to me, or at the most a story that unfortunately a friend of mine had experienced something troubling, and they'd relate it to me. I would and would discuss it. And so I've just been seeing it happen to other people and just being like, feeling helpless and feeling scared and sad. And I'm like, this is, how do I convince myself? If I can't convince myself that things are going to be better, how do I do this in written form? How do I do this in my comic? And I lost faith in the comic. I lost faith in my ability to tell this story. And it took me a while to gain that back. I honestly can't remember. I wish I could tell you how I got it back, exactly how I got it back. But part of it involved going back to the things that had given me inspiration in the first place, given me hope. Which the first thing that ever gave me this promise of a better future was Star Trek. I was raised on Star Trek: The Next Generation. I was 4 years old when it began on TV, and so it formed a lot of my life growing up. And the thing about Star Trek is it was built entirely to be the best possible outcome for humanity. We put aside our differences, whether they were class differences or racial differences or gender differences or political differences. We put them all aside, and we all agreed as one people to work together for a better future for everyone on Earth. And that's what's happening at Jen's school here. That's what these students are supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be the new generation who makes life better. However they're able to do it, whether it's curing diseases or creating new creatures that could improve our lives in one way or another, or morphing people into forms that are better adapted for certain tasks or environments, or creating forms that people feel like that's what their true form is, finding their real self. All of these things are possible and more. And it's exciting to come up with these, solutions to these existential problems. It's exciting to think that maybe one day we will transcend humanity and become something more, have the abilities, have more abilities than we could have dreamed of. And it all starts in this story, today, on this day in the story, where you have some students that are standing up for what they believe is right, fighting other students who are standing up for what they believe is right. And they're both right, they're both wrong. Some of them are more wrong than others, of course, but the idea of how do we overcome prejudice and maliciousness, I finally found my answer to it, for at least this story. I found it in that hope, that optimism of we are stronger together than we are divided. And when that piece finally clicked in my head, I knew exactly where the rest of this, how this story was going to get to the destination I've always wanted to get to. I realized this student body needs to unify again. And the bad guys need to be punished. But first, they're going to help clean up the mess they made. And that's what goes down. That's the heavy section. I hope that that all made sense. Yeah. So honestly, before I started recording, I wasn't sure I was going to be able to communicate it and communicate it in a way that really that could work. So I hope that all. I hope it all came out. Anyway, yeah. So let's keep going with some more production stuff. This page was a lot of work. Yeah, I know. Hard left. We're doing a hard left into less emotional topic. This is 19 panels, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a lot of panels in this page. The more action that happened, the more I realized there are more story beats now. There's less dialogue, there's briefer dialogue, but there's a lot of action points I have to hit. So we have Katsuko and her brother Toho are fighting in the hall. We have Noah and 13 have to get close to unplugging the machine. Some readers were very astute. They're like, why don't they just unplug the machine? I had to start getting that established and all that. So this ended up being a big thing to work through. But now that I'd regained my motivation, regained my faith in myself to tell the story, I'm like, I don't know. I know where the plot's going. I don't know how I'm going to translate that onto the comic page, but damn it, I'm going to find a way to do it. And so this page is just a mess of panels, but I did my absolute best to try and make some sense of, you're supposed to read it in this direction like this. And it doesn't totally flow, but I tried to separate the panels the best I could to sort of get you to see, okay, all right, this balloon's going into this panel, so I see this panel next, and logically the next thing, there's a black bar here. I'll go down first because this black bar is thinner. And then the panels, okay, this leads up into this panel. The word balloons, I'll follow the word balloons. Here we go. Okay, great. And now we're down to here. And then there's a bar here, but this one touches this panel, so I'll go into this panel next. And then this panel touches this panel. I'll go into this panel next. That was my logic for how to flow across here. And I suppose I could have made this bar thinner to keep that going, but I didn't. But so yeah, there's just a very busy page, and I did my absolute best to manage. But ideally, I would have broken this into maybe 3 individual pages. But this is getting long enough as it is. This is the longest chapter. It's 36 pages. And it's like, I've got to condense this, because eventually this is all going to get put into a trade paperback, and I don't want a 250-page trade paperback. That's just way too big of a thing. So, yeah. Walker, finally we get to see what the heck Walker's unicorn horn does. This wasn't its design, but the idea, and this is a friend of mine. This is his character that's in this comic. And so he came up with this idea of a unicorn horn. His hair, which is black, absorbs lots of light. The hair has these, he's genetically encoded his hair to have like these essentially organic solar panels that are microscopically grown into the hair strands. All of this hair collects solar energy or light energy, and it stores it all in the horn. And this is set up in the previous chapter. I always intended to bring it back in this chapter during the fight to show he can just overcharge at this so it can discharge its energy, and so that's how he helps with the fight. And there were several other characters. This guy has ice powers. I never totally explained that. He's sort of like a Mr. Freeze character. I never really explained it because the science behind it, I try to make everything scientifically plausible in the comic, but some of them I just can't work out. And so some of these characters, unfortunately, I half-assed, and I really need to try harder not to do that. But yeah, so this guy has these unexplained ice powers, and you would have seen more of what goes on. I wanted to make many, many more pages of just seeing them all fight each other. But my energy was getting sapped, and I'm like, I've got to move this story along. It's going to take several more months for me to do this. Just do a couple of pages, and again, I needed to condense this. Things were just getting out too long. Let's just bring this to a head. Let's have him activate the device. Boom! Now everything changes. This is a machine that controls bees. Yeah. I wanted a lot more of kooky stuff like this. That didn't work into the comic. But just imagine this huge crowd of all these different characters doing this. And yeah, no, I'm the artist. I'm supposed to draw it so you don't have to imagine it, but I showed a little bit. I crammed in what things that I felt I could get away with, just enough to do it and move on. So he's draining the power here, so everything starts to go dark. All the power in the building is getting focused on this machine. Laser targeting. He is the target of this machine. I put these here so that everybody would know. Reading this, everyone would know. He didn't accidentally zap himself. He's intentionally trying to zap himself. The surprise is it actually goes off. The heroes don't stop him. And to get that kinetic energy, to get that, like, oh boy, this is serious, this is bad, and this is just an intense burst of energy, I thought, well, what if I just, like, sketched out this thing really roughly, and we get this just single color panel of just this bright yellow light engulfing him. So I tried to make the emotional impact just hit. And something goes horribly wrong because he is in agony. Now, this is Karis's contribution to the story. She really does have something to contribute after all, because she answers the phone. So General Taurus is a character that I've been setting up very slowly for a while. There are mentions to him obliquely in several chapters in Phase 1. And I've never really knew exactly when to bring him in until Class Warfare happened. Then I'm like, okay, this is when the army needs to get really, like, directly involved. This is going on too long. It needs to be stopped. And they're going to come in and stop it if the students don't stop it first. So this is finally my way of finally saying, well, we've been talking about this general for so long. The general this. I have a call with the general and the general that. And why? Because the army is partially bankrolling the school. And Jen's got some of Jen's students are developing these things for the army. Demetrius has his genetic warfare stuff. He's developing these weapons, these biological weapons. So, not poison gas or anything. That's not his angle. His angle is non-lethal methods of conducting warfare. And those animals that shoot out in the bubbles, that was one of Demetrius's inventions. I skipped over that part. But this thing is one of Demetrius's things, where he shoots these bubbles that pop in the air. They pop due to air pressure, sailing through the air, and they release these animals that run amok, and they'll chew up systems, or they'll attack you, or whatever. These little beads, these are all like just these little sort of kind of like ant-like or mite sort of animals, and they, as a group, they work together to pull off the barricades. So that was the idea behind those. So here, Karis communicates to the army what the heck's going on. So yeah, Jen mentions the general at the very beginning of chapter 10. Jen says she has a conference call with the general later that day. So that was me setting up. Okay, at some point the army is going to get involved later. So got to plant that now. I'm not sure how they'll be involved, but they will be involved. So I'm going to mention the general right up front. So that way, when the school goes dark, when Jen doesn't pick up her phone for the general, he'll suspect something's up. So we tried calling the office, couldn't get her for their teleconference that was scheduled. So now he's calling the personal phone, which fortunately Karis just happens to have it right there. Excuse me. Happens to have it right there. She answers it, and that way that connects. And that sets up something for a little bit later. So at this point, and now everything in the cafeteria is super, super intense. And I'm like, I need to get this out. I need to get the emotion of this out. This is an intense thing that happens. How do I make the page intense? Well, really harsh yellows, obnoxious orange yellow. So I colored everything like that. And so this brings back this dramatic lighting. Everything's coming to a head. I wanted these pages to be quality. So very slowly, I put these pages together, and it's like I'll take as much time as I can. I'm not going to force it. I'll get this done. But unlike the first half of this chapter, I knew exactly what I was doing. I knew what I wanted to do. I knew what I felt I knew what I should do with all the pages. It was just a matter of rolling up my sleeves and getting them done. And I'm like, I'm going to do the best I can for this. So we have these really high energy pages. Even when it's just talking, it's high energy. I've got this intense highlight in their eyes and light shining right in their face. Everything's being shouted because the machine is really loud. So I hope that came across. I didn't have a sound effects for the machine. I just had the sound effects of his agonized screaming, but hopefully it came across that there's a lot of noise in this room in addition to that. Excuse me again. I'm going to try to edit these out of my video. Hopefully I will, but if you still hear this crinkling or whatever, I apologize. Editing video is harder than editing audio because I don't have the software for it. That's ideal. Alright, so this sets up, there's a tiny little thing on the machine. If you break it, it shuts the machine down without killing anyone. It has a slow, controlled shutdown process. So that is the idea here with getting this machine to shut down, and the final piece of the puzzle in terms of how do we fix this. I needed something for Flint to do. I wanted Flint to save the day. He was the one that ultimately, after everyone else tried, they all did something. All of them did something to get them along the way to victory, but none of them could do it. Flint was the final character that could contribute to the story, who hadn't contributed to the story yet. And it was very important for me to have Flint be the person that could do what no one else could do. And not even Noah, who could... Yeah, Noah could crawl up to the ceiling and drop the rock, but Flint needed to fly right over it to do a precision strike. So I designed this exact scenario for Flint. It was all tailored to his skill for gliding. And so it was hard. And I don't know if it really is that plausible to you as the reader reading through this. I hope it is. That Flint could carry this big heavy rock, fly right over the machine without getting caught in its field, its little bubble of transformative cancer. Hopefully it did work for you. But it was the best solution that I could come up with to give Flint his unique hero moment. And so before we get to that, though, another thing that I wanted to do with Cass is I wanted to introduce another one of her abilities that she inherited from her goat DNA. And that is, goats are fantastic climbers. So she's got this instinct of, I know exactly where to place my hooves that I can get purchase to climb up this rickety block of stuff. So that was another that was another reason I wanted the school to be partially demolished. Cass was supposed to climb up to get to Flint. Originally there was going to be like, if the larger school was torn apart, I was going to have Cass climb up a couple of stories of rubble, carrying Flint, and then get him up to a place where he could then glide out to where he needed to go. But I'm like, that's a bit too complicated. Flint should just stay up there the whole time. But Cass still needed to get up there. I'm like, why should Cass have to get up there? Oh, well, that's pretty easy. All the pieces to that answer are already placed. It's really loud in the room. She's really far away. She needs to be able to communicate to Flint exactly what to do up close. So that's why she needs to climb. Great, now I get to have her climb up here. You see her doing the thing, and I threw in this backflip at the last minute. I'm like, you know what? I really need this to be impressive. Just her just sort of hopping, hop, hop, hop. That's, yeah, okay, but I want it to be visually impressive. So her final leap, she goes from here, she does a flip in the air, and she lands on her feet. The stars in the eyes, that's a direct homage to Steven Universe. Whenever Steven was amazed by somebody, he would have these stars in his eyes. And between these two panels, during this panel, we don't hear it, but Cass explains everything to Flint. Because we don't need it explained again. We've already read it. So yeah, Flint does what he needs to do. This is a situation where I wanted, like, this is part of where Noah's arc comes in. I'm juggling all these things at once. It's so hard to juggle all this stuff. I set up way too much for myself to do. All the characters had, everyone but Morty, all the other main characters had like a personal arc in this story in one way or another. So Noah's arc is, oh wow, that was not an intentional pun. Noah's character arc is, he starts this chapter doubting himself, and now he's doubting Cass too. He's, anything that has to do with Flint's safety, he's now super, super concerned about Flint's safety. Why is that? Well, because he's important to Cass, so he's important to Noah too. And Noah realized, I screwed up in chapter 9. I screwed up and I almost let Flint transform himself. And even though I tried to stop it, it still happened anyway because I got far enough in my experiment that Flint was able to just take the experiment the rest of the way. And Flint was able to transform himself more. And now you're losing your brother bit by bit. And that's scary to us. And now I'm doubting myself. So that's where that's his angle. So we're seeing like he's trying to do the right thing, and Cass is trying to do the right thing, and Flint wants to do the right thing. So Flint's just like, I don't have time for your melodrama. I'm just gonna go ahead and fly this rock over here and break the machine, shutting it down and saving Ken. So now we're gonna get back into some serious territory. So now I was drawing this, and in my head it's like, okay, so he's got all these tumors all over his body. Okay. It's one thing to think of an idea, it's quite another to draw it. To spend the 20 to 30 to 40 minutes drawing a warped, twisted body with tons of deadly cancerous tumors. Just bloating it up. And so I drew this, and I'm like, wow, this is really terrifying. So again, I really hope that I didn't trivialize cancer through creating this chapter. I really like a lot of this dialogue in here is very much just like, okay, yeah, no, this is bad. He's going to die if we don't help him immediately. Not so it's just it's not that it's not pleasant at all. So we final bit of housekeeping with the explanations, and just like, you know, trying to find that balance between light-hearted comedy and adventure, and no, someone's actually dying in front of us and we need to stop it. And this is where the optimistic message, this is where the optimistic message that finally came to me gets brought into the story. All of the students realize, hey, you know what? These machines that Ken put together, they actually do work well together, but they all have little individual quirks that he's not aware of. If he'd just asked us, how does this work? We could have collaborated and worked. Ken wanted to be the hero of his story. He wanted to be the hero. So by not including everybody else, he set himself up for failure without realizing it. So the ultimate theme here that I finally was like, this is where it all ties together. Literally bringing everyone together. We're stronger together. We can accomplish more when we work together. So they all work together. And even some of the bad guys are like, look, we set out to do a good thing. And to some extent, some of them more than others, they realize the way they went about it was absolutely wrong. But their heart was in the right place, and now that they're in a position where they can help, they're going to help. And they do. Ken is cured, but he's still an absolute irredeemable jerk, using the lightest possible language. And so there's nothing to stop him except an actual bullet. And the army's storming in here. And by this point I'd come to peace with the fact that I was depicting violence in school, and I knew the army's got to get involved. It would be ludicrous to not have the National Guard be called in at this point. There's a snow emergency. It's not stated here, but the governor of the state issued a statewide emergency for the snowstorm, and in that the army is using that as a cover to come in here and conduct this operation that Karras told General Torres about on the phone. So that's how they come into this picture. And they subdue Ken. This was intentionally meant to be shocking. I really did not. First I drew him with all these cancerous tumors, and now I'm drawing a bullet going through his body. So this is like, yeah, okay. I'm taking UTC into a very heavy, area, and I don't want to come back here again. I can't promise it won't go back here again. But if it does come back to this violent, dark setup, I promise you I'm going to do the best I can to treat it with the sober, careful treatment that a subject of this seriousness deserves. So at the same time, this UTC is really ostensibly a madcap Saturday morning adventure. So I'm going to be more careful about treading that line, approaching that line. I really shouldn't be getting that close to it. But for the purposes of the dramatic tension of the scene, and for some of the character arcs, some of this stuff is life-changing and scary. And like Cass in Phase 1, when she realizes, I'm going to be a goat girl for the rest of my life, possibly. This is going to ruin me. This is some really deep, life-changing stuff. Whether your life is being impacted by a gun, or whether it's just being, whoa, I woke up and I'm a goat. It's all, in one way or another, you can look at it as a serious thing. But also, there's optimism that you can bring back out of it. There's good that can come from this. You can find outcomes that can make things better for other people. And these students, the outcome here, yeah, it was a very dark, violent road, and we should never have gone down it to get to the outcome, but there is a good outcome. There's a silver lining. They found a cure for a certain form of cancer. And I really wanted this line, and there were nitpicks, and people were right to nitpick this. I wanted this line to be as on the hitting the nail on the head as possible. They cured a type of cancer. They didn't cure all cancer, because not all cancers are the same. Some require different treatments than others, but they found a cure, a guaranteed, works every time cure for a certain type of cancer that is, in its ideal form, once it's perfected, it's going to be harmless and instant. And that would be awesome if we had that in real life. So all the stuff's being confiscated, and Ken is under arrest, but he's also going to the hospital for treatment because he needs it. This in here too, like I'm gonna absolutely be sure, yes, don't worry, Jen is fine. She's stuck as a kid, but the cancer itself dissipated once it made her young. It self-destructed. It was always designed to self-destruct. That was Ken's original design. He didn't intend to kill anybody. He just threatened. And that's also bad. That is a bad thing to do. I'm not gonna, I'm not making light of that. He threatened her life, but his original intention was just to do that and not to actually cause her to die. So yeah, the cancer turned her young, and then it converted itself into new healthy young cells. And yeah, if you check the science on that, it doesn't sound, it's not going to work out. But all these scientific explanations I try to make as plausible as possible. This is kind of a hard page to color, actually. So this is happening right here. I'm sorry about that. All this is happening right here. You got these red and blue lights, and the sun's going down. We're at sunset right now. So the colors are kind of weird. I tried to make it moody. Ever since the ray went off, I returned full-on shading to all the pages in the comic. And I'm like, okay, it's because this is we're in a more somber state right now. The shading helps add to the drama, and especially this like different coloring. But I'm still feeling my way through this. So, I don't know, your mileage may vary whether you think this really works or not, but I've got the blue and the red cast light from the lights, and then I have the sunset purple. So, yeah. Ash and Demetrius, I've been writing them, this is something that I've been eager to get to for a while, but was never sure how to put it into the comic. Yeah, this is more just establishing what's going on, the following action. And then Jen making her announcement for the school. Alright, so I'll talk about Ash and Dee when we get to their big page. But this here was hard to write just because I had a lot of points I wanted to make, but I didn't want to spend 5 pages talking about it. So I just tried to hit the most simple points, and I don't have answers. Another major thing I learned during making this chapter is I don't have the answers, and I don't think I should have all the answers. I shouldn't be lecturing to the reader. I shouldn't be telling you what you should draw, what conclusion you should draw. So I'm trying to at this point. So I'm trying to present the ideas instead. I'm trying to present the perspectives, the points of view, and encourage discussion and debate. Who is right? Who is wrong? Should Jen shut down the school? Are her reasons for shutting down the school the best reasons? I don't know. But to me, to her, they make the most sense. A lot's gone down. We really can't continue like this. And Jen probably was misguided in thinking that by picking certain students out of the population, that they could regulate the other students. You got to think about the tension that could cause among their peer group. Like, oh wow, so now you're going to rat me out if I do something wrong? I thought we were friends, or I thought we were at least acquaintances, or I thought we were lab partners. But if I do one thing out of line, you get to come in and tell me I can't do my experiment anymore? Who are you to judge me for that? And the idea of that paired with the point I'm trying to make Jen here saying is, look, I tried to give you the tools to do what you dreamed of doing. I presented you with all these toys that you could play with to your heart's content to get what you wanted out of it. but also I set you up with this temptation to do awful things in the name of good. And so that's the direction I was coming at this from, trying to find the flaws in my own logic as the writer setting up this school as this new bastion of scientific advancement for the 21st century. This new generation of kids, they're going to change our world. They're going to have revolutionary technology and science. But is all of that going to be good? Of course, we can't have madcap adventures if things don't go wrong, if people aren't villains, if we don't have certain, bad actors or just misguided people making these things that cause trouble. So trying to deal with all this. So this is me returning to the muck, but with gloves on this time, and trying to pick through it and be like, what are the good points here? What have we learned? If we don't have the answers, do we at least have the right questions? So you're absolutely free as the reader to take what you will from this, draw your conclusions if you want to, determine who has the best point, who has the best, who's right, who's wrong. Because honestly, I write these characters, I don't know anymore. I don't know if Jen made the right call setting up the school in the first place. I don't know if she's making the right call shutting it down. But from her perspective, that's the call that needs to be made right now. We can't just keep having this school do all this crazy stuff. But that doesn't mean that all the bad kids are going to be let off the hook. They're going to jail, or they're going to be the disciplinary action will be justly taken. That needs to be stated, and it is right here. And also, it doesn't mean we're going to forget about all of the people that are in bodies they're not meant to be in. We're going to take care of that too. Don't worry, Cass. We'll work on your cure. Anybody who wants to transform back into their original bodies, or if they want to transform into bodies they haven't had the chance to do that yet, everyone's going to get sorted out. We'll still fix this, but we're going to do it better. That's where it's going. So the last big thing I'm going to touch on before this long commentary is finally closed out is Ash and Demetrius. So they weren't originally created to be a couple, but during chapter 4, I was writing chapter 4, and it occurred to me at one point, hey, it just makes sense for these guys to be a couple, because there's a page where Demetrius is not in chapter 4, but Ash is, and Ash mentions doing a study session with Demetrius, and he says, oh yeah, so Demetrius told me he was just with you last night or 2 days ago, and he said that you went through this. So I'm caught up to speed on, are you okay? So I wrote that, I'm like, okay, yeah, so Ash naturally just spends a lot of time with Demetrius. But also, I also wrote Ash to be Demetrius's work partner. Ash is Demetrius's mouthpiece, because Demetrius doesn't talk. He's unable to form coherent sentences. And, it's brought out in things like this. It's like, well, okay, he can't even write coherent sentences. His brain can't form them. He can understand English fine, but he can't write it. He can't speak it without sounding like a garbled mess. And so he chooses not to talk at all. How can Ash serve as the mouthpiece for somebody who has that much difficulty communicating his thoughts? Especially such complex thoughts as these scientific experiments that he's doing. So the more I thought about how does Ash work with Demetrius, how can Ash key into that, the more I realized, hey, Ash needs to intimately know Demetrius as a friend. He's like, okay, yeah, they're best friends. But more than that, Ash just becomes such a integral part of Demetrius's life, his way to communicate with the larger world. They really kind of share one brain. That's sort of the conclusion I came to in terms of how they work together. Demetrius is able to gesticulate. he doesn't, again, no language works for him. He can't even do sign language because that still involves a part of his brain that doesn't work well, forming sentences, forming coherent ideas. So he gesticulates in more visual ways. So he has sort of a gesture-based language, but it's not sign language as we know it. We've seen that demonstrated before. But mostly it's just I have to draw like expressions for him. You know, he comes across silently. The thing is, Ash has spent so much time with D, and he has done so much work with him, and he's developed this intuition for how Demetrius thinks. That, to me, putting them together, it's like, well, then naturally they're the best pairing. They're two halves of a whole. They share the same mindset. They've come to share so much. Then it's logical, you know, and it's not just logical, but it's also emotional. That if they have this attachment, then they're sharing everything with each other. And so that became just the natural idea of, yeah, wow, these guys are the perfect couple. So the trick was, though, like for me, like how do I put that in the story? They're not main characters. They're secondary characters. They contribute to the plot, but we don't often see them, and the plots never revolve around them. So how do I really show that they're a couple without like taking all the attention away from the story and being like, oh hey, look guys, I have a gay couple in my comic. And I'm a flawed storyteller in that regard too, because I put too much emphasis on they're a gay couple as opposed to I should have just been treating them as how I would treat any couple. And my track record for treating couples in general isn't that great either. I'm not big on romance stories. I don't really see myself as much of a romantic person. I don't have the headspace for a lot of that stuff. And that's part of the reason why Cass and Noah's relationship isn't really addressed that much in the comic. It's just been, oh, he's not my boyfriend until he is her boyfriend. And then now we haven't even seen them date yet. I will rectify that. Minor spoiler, I will rectify that very soon. But I don't write couples. I'm bad at that. And so combining it with me overthinking this sort of like, how do I introduce this in my comic? And I worried too much, and I started thinking the wrong things, and so I kept talking myself out of mentioning their relationship, and it's just, you be the judge of whether I was right or wrong to wait until page 250 to make it clear to the readers. But I have been writing them ever since chapter 4. I have been writing them as a couple, and so at this point it was important for me to like realize, okay, you know what, we need to talk about it, especially in this chapter where they've been through a lot emotionally. Like they didn't contribute. Sorry guys, I'm sorry, Ash and D. That's not what I meant to say. They did contribute to the fight, but they were taken out of it very quickly because D was injured and Ash had to help him out. And so it's like they've been through this, traumatic experience together. So we need a moment with them. We need to see where they're at. And this is the perfect time, finally, to be like, look, hey, they're a couple. But they're going back to the emojis. Originally, I actually had all this text. This is originally all text, except Demetrius was texting in emojis. But then I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. That's not kind of Demetrius either, because he's texting. All he can do is text in emojis. He can't write back to his family. But how about his family and his friends? They text him in all emojis too, so that they can share that language. And they're not like they're not doing it the way they always normally do it with text messaging. I mean, like, we can do this, but you can't. they're all sharing the same visual language. And that's another thing where I'm like, this is a great way to, bring that community vibe in, and to just show how somebody who does grow up with aphasia, this may be a way that that their family connects with them. So yeah, I really enjoyed doing these last few pages. Like these, from here on, it was no longer a struggle for me to make this comic. I'd gotten over all the difficult pages to draw, the action, and gotten over all the difficult plot points, and I had finally come to terms with myself as the creator of the comic. I'd regained my faith in my ability to draw the comic and my faith in these characters. Because, it's cliche, but I see these characters as my children. And they're going to outlast me. The legacy of my comics is what I plan to leave this world with. And I want them to be the best that they can be. And I want them to be able to bring entertainment to you. I want them to bring, I want you to come away from my stories with a different perspective, thinking of something you might not have thought before, or just having a good time. If nothing else, enjoy just having some fun time with them. And that was another, it's another reason why it was difficult to make this chapter, because it touches on some very heavy topics. And at the end of the day, I just want to entertain you with the stories. And if it's going to leave you with a new perspective, all the better. That's icing on the cake. I not only gave you a fun distraction for some time, but it also, well, whether or not it was fun, I don't know. And yeah, but it was something that you could read that was in some way or shape stimulating to you. And I really hope that you were able to get something out of this. And I hope you're able to get something out of this commentary too. The message that Jen gives to Kestrel here: regret is the first step to becoming a better person. That's a lesson I sort of learned myself as I grew up. I blame myself for a lot of things. I certainly blame myself for a lot of missteps I've made in this comic. And I'm going to come away from this commentary thinking I really shouldn't have made it deep. I shouldn't have talked about the serious issues. I should, are people really going to listen to this commentary wanting to hear about my problems and the world's problems? And I honestly don't know if I'm doing the best job representing myself, my own thoughts and intentions. But I got to leave that up to you, the reader, to decide for yourself. Whether you're happy with the comic, whether you're happy with me as a creator. This comic made me incredibly vulnerable, and I started wondering if I was doing a good thing. And okay, I'm spinning my wheels now. I've talked about this already. But the idea of unchaining yourself. It's not. I didn't just have Jen say that to make a funny joke about Kestrel picking the lock on her cuffs. It really is a message that I've had to teach to myself, and that and other people have been trying to get me to learn too. And I hope that that it resonates with some people out there too. That it's okay to feel guilty. It's okay to feel regret, but to steep yourself in it, to immerse yourself in it, that is unhealthy. The key to regret is what comes after regret as a result of feeling regret. It's not enough to say, I'm sorry. You need to take the next steps to improve yourself, to make sure you never do that wrong again, to recognize why what you did was wrong. Not just, oh, I'm sorry I got caught, but I'm sorry that I did this to you in the first place. And I promise that I will do everything I can to not do that again. Some people, just understanding that what they did was wrong is hard. coming to that realization, admitting to yourself, I did something wrong. Ken is incapable of admitting to himself what he did was wrong. And you can call him cartoonish for that. You can call him one-dimensional for that. No one has, but that's sort of an argument I could see people making. But honestly, a lot of stuff I've read online in these past couple years, there's a lot of cyberbullies out there. There's a lot of really malicious people that just want to see the world burn and see people hurt. A lot of them talk just like Ken does. I've part of Ken's dialogue is taken, paraphrased from tweets and Facebook posts and other social media that awful people have written. It's out there, it's real, and I'm not gonna pretend it's not. So at the end of all of this, we need to do everything we can to be better people. And I said that I had no message. I said I had no answer that I wanted to drill into anyone's head, but I was wrong, because I do. My one message that I hope that everyone takes away from this, at least, is we can all be better people. And we all need to be better people. We need to be better to our friends and people we don't know. We need to be better to ourselves too. So we get a relatively happy ending. We get people laughing and making jokes and smiling and uniting. And Noah has been invited to the Callaways for Thanksgiving. And Flint saved the day and is going to be rewarded like the hero he is. And we're going into a brand new phase. A whole lot of things are going to change, as they always do in UTC. But our cast is still together, and they're still going to fight toward what they want and hope for, and they're going to stick to their ideals, and they're going to do the best that they possibly can. And are things going to be better from now on? We'll see. But I can certainly tell you that I'm going to see this thing through to the end. Whether Phase 3 is the end or if we go beyond that, I don't know yet, but I have a much clearer vision for what UTC is, what I would like it to be, than I ever have before. And I have more faith in my characters than I ever have before. And I really hope that we all get to see how the rest of this phase unfolds, where these characters go, and what amazing things they can all accomplish together. Thank you so much for reading UTC. Thank you for all of your support everywhere. I listen to every email. I read every email. I read every forum post. And I can't tell you guys, I can't tell all of you readers how grateful I am to know that you guys, you people love my stuff. Maybe love's too hard of a word, and maybe I'm patting myself a bit too hard on the back, but I'm making this for you guys, and I'm making this for all of my readers, all of you listening, and it's important that you enjoy the story, that the story doesn't hurt you, that I don't hurt you. And I really hope that I haven't. Anything I've said or anything that I've written, presented, shown, drawn. And if I have, and you want to talk about it, please reach out to me. Please email me. However you're, communicate, however you are comfortable with. I've got my contact info on the website. I would like to know if there's a way that I can improve myself. I'm trying really hard all the time. And I know I've got a ways to go, but I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep drawing. I'm going to keep writing. And I hope you stick with Cass and Flint and Noah and Morty and everybody for the ride that Phase 3 is going to be. I can't wait to get back to drawing and showing you, well, what's next. Thank you again, and be well.